Eat that, no worries. Welcome to the book festival, everybody. It's good to see some names and faces, and more folks are joining, which is just fine. I am Jill Stukenberg, and I'm hosting tonight's event, and I'll introduce Dr. Gina Senarighi here in a few moments. But welcome. Thanks for figuring out Zoom, if you were figuring out Zoom, or for returning to it if you spend a lot of time on it already. We are going to show a brief video to thank our sponsors to start this talk off, and then we will introduce our author, Dr. Gina Senarighi, who's going to be taking questions tonight from the audience. So if you haven't come with your questions about sex, love, relationships, intimacy, you have 2 minutes to brainstorm for them. And okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play this video here to thank our book festival sponsors.
Welcome to the 2020 Central Wisconsin Book Festival. This week of amazing events is possible only because of the support of our sponsors, which include
Marathon County Public Library,
the Friends of the Marathon County Public Library,
the MCPL Foundation,
the Community Arts Grant Program
of the Community Foundation of North Central Wisconsin,
with funds provided by the Wisconsin Arts Board, which is a state agency,
the Community Foundation,
and the B.A. and Esther Greenheck Foundation,
the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service,
the Merco Foundation Fund,
Wisconsin Public Radio,
the Master Gardener Program of Marathon County,
North Central Area Congregations Organized to Make an Impact,
or Naomi,
and Yankee Bookstore.
Thank you to all of our friends and partners who make the Wisconsin Book Festival possible.
And we thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you all, and welcome to this Central Wisconsin Book Festival event. It is my pleasure to introduce here my friend and the Wisconsin's own finest. I say that because she's returned to Wisconsin, so I can say that again after living out of state for a while. But I would like to introduce Dr. Gina Senarighi, who is an author, teacher, sexuality counselor, and certified relationship coach. She's been supporting clean fights and dirty sex in happy, healthy relationships as an educator, consultant, and couples therapist for over 10 years. On a personal note, I have known Gina for 3 times that amount of time, and she has been helping me with all of my problems for 3 times as long. A couple of notes just for folks who might be new to Zoom, just in case. You can, of course, one thing you might want to, you can toggle between speaker view and gallery view at the top right of your screen, which is something some folks like to do. I think if you keep it on speaker view, for the most part, you're going to see Dr. Gina in the center, or perhaps me when I occasionally give her a question. If you prefer to see everybody in Brady Bunch style, if you click at the top, you can look at it that other way. Also, I am asking everyone to mute their microphones tonight, and I think I have you muted even against your will for a little while here, but you can turn on your camera if you like, or put a picture, but it's also just fine if you don't want to put on a camera or a picture or anything. It is something that can drain your bandwidth a little bit, so that's one reason some folks don't do it. We are going to take questions tonight to hear all about Dr. Gina Senarighi, but before I do also need to say this is her new book. It's called Love More, Fight Less, a relationship workbook for couples. It's available at all kinds of fine stores, and it's a fantastic book that you can use. It's a workbook with activities and strategies. So we're going to ask her lots of fun questions tonight, but also if there's anything she doesn't get around to answering, you should get her book where you can learn all about it here. And the strategy for questions tonight will be, I'm a teacher, so I'm going to make you raise your hand. If you raise your hand, then I can unmute you. So you can ask your question yourself if you like, or you can put your question in the chat and I will select some and read them out loud. To access the chat, you click on the bottom of your screen on the little chat word, and then a chat appears off to the side. The way that you raise your hand is If you click on the word participants at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see a group of participants who appear off to the right. And when you see your own name, there's you can click on the words more next to your name. And that's a way to choose a raising your hand symbol. I think I've got that right. Does that make sense? You can see it? All right, I'm gonna say, take it away, Dr. Gina Senarighi. While I'm waiting for, well, I'm gonna give you one question that came in to start, and then I'll look for some hands being raised here. This is a question that came in on your Instagram, and you shared these with me. So really, it's not my question. Just so everyone knows, this is not. I am not asking.
True.
Right? It's from a friend. The guy I'm dating says he needs space. How do I stop myself from freaking out?
Great. It's a good question to start us off. Can I just say thank you for having me before I get rolling and respond? I really like the title of Wisconsin's Finest. That's gonna make me like chuckle for the longest time. I had this flash of like a billboard with like me, some cheese curds, and a Harley Davidson all together when I heard that. So that's gonna just keep me tickled for a while. But yeah, it's good to be back here, and it's really lovely that you all were willing to have me this year at the book fest when this book came out. I mean, I think growing up here, I would have never imagined myself being a Wisconsin author. It wasn't something that I had dreamed of, and then to have it happen the year that I moved back is pretty timely anyway, and really sweet to get to share this. So okay, so that said, this is a Q&A of After Dark, right? So I should get to answering some of the questions. It's the guy I'm dating needs space. What do I do? Or how do I stop myself from freaking out, right? That one?
Yes, how do I stop
Good
myself from
question.
freaking out that he wants his space?
Yeah. Okay, well, so there are a couple of things that come to mind, right? Like people ask for space in lots of different ways in relationships. And for a lot of us, it can be hard not to first like take that personally and think that's some kind of rejection of me or of our relationship, or like, you know, there's something wrong, right? It's natural for human beings to want to have investment time in their own interests, or you know, read a book by themselves, or take a walk, or do their self-care, or have their own friendships. That's an okay thing. So for some of us, like we've been taught over and over that if my partner doesn't want to do everything with me all the time, there must be something wrong. And that's actually not the most balanced approach to have in relationship. We want to make sure that just like there is some spaciousness so you can have your own, you know, individual interests and cultivate your personal identity and stay connected. I know my folks had hopped on here for a second, and one of the, they've been married a really long time. And one of the lessons that I've learned from watching them is that they each still to this day cultivate their own interests. They're like volunteering for separate things, or dad goes fishing and mom takes a trip with a different friend, and they, you know, they do some of their own stuff. And that's been a really good role model for me to see, like people, it's okay to do that, right? So that's like first level of having some space. Sometimes people say in relationship, I need some space, like I want to not be in a lot of communication for a little while. That's kind of a different thing than the day-to-day cultivating autonomy thing, right? That's like deliberately saying like, I gotta pause something that's going on, or I need a little room from something that's going on, or maybe I need some time to digest and talk with my therapist. Or, you know, there's some dynamic between us that's not really working for me, right? So I hear people say that, and they use this phrase, I need some space. We've seen it probably almost everyone on some rom-com or dramedy on TV at some point. One character says to another, I need some space, and it's very dramatic. And it can be really dramatic because it's so uncertain, right? If I'm the person who doesn't want space, I want closeness, I'm kind of left in the lurch with just that phrase, wondering like, so should I call you or not call you? Or will I see you next weekend for the plans we have or not? Or like, if I have a question about some, like, what are the expectations? You need space isn't all that clear. So I ask folks to answer some, like, I need space from what? Like, maybe you don't want any communication. Okay, well, for how long, right? Because if I do have a question or I need something from you, how can I, as the person receiving that little quote, I need space, how can I be sure that I don't end up like, annoying you by pushing through your boundaries, by just saying, how you doing? Or I'm thinking about you, or like trying to be sweet, right? So it can be really helpful to get some clarity. If you're the person who's already maybe this person's listening actually, because I got this on my Instagram and I had shared the little link. So if it's one of you, or if it's somebody who watches the recording, if you can reach out, in a way that the person can still have some boundaries. So maybe over text or over an email, and say, hey, when you're ready, I just want to know when I can circle back with you. So I know we can talk about like, what's the next steps, right? You get and give them all the space that you want or that they need, if you can. Right. So did I answer all the parts of the questions, Duke? Oh, how do I not freak out? That's the most important part. How do I not freak out? You are going to take care of yourself. Like, you're going to double down on your self-care, drinking water, taking vitamins, taking your medicine, working out, whatever your workout is, movement. You're going to call your friends. You might distract yourself some, and that can be okay, because sometimes like rumination and anxiety will get kicked up for people. That's okay. You're going to call your therapist or your coach, right? Like, so you're just going to like kind of hunker down and check in with yourself. And keep reminding yourself that you're respecting this person's boundaries, right? So sometimes I'm even somebody who I'll be like, oh, it's so hard to not reach out to them if they don't want to hear from me. The times that's happened in my life. But part of what helps me is remembering, like, they asked for this and I'm doing my best to respect that, as hard as it is. So, and how's that for a complete answer? I've now answered it like 3 different, like a tiered cake or something there, 3 different ways.
It was a tiered cake. It was wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for peeling the Band-Aid off of our first question.
Yeah, this is
cool.
Fun. I mean, I could talk Q&As about relationships. We could be here all night. So
right. And while I give folks a moment to feel if they want to raise their own hand, which, remember, you can do electronically by clicking on the Participants tab and then looking for your name. And then there's a way to raise your hand and you can ask your question, or you can type your question in the chat and I'll read it out loud to Dr. Gina here. But while folks are just taking a minute to do that, I wanted to remind everybody of a couple other things. Gina is also the co-host of a fantastic podcast called Swoon, SWOON, where she and her colleague discuss lots of questions about sex and intimacy, and they have different themes for every episode, and it's another fantastic resource to check out. In addition to her book, is this podcast of hers called Swoon.
Yeah.
Yes. So one more. I'll put the link in the chat later too. But it's so juicy that. Oh, go ahead.
We sometimes do Q&A sessions on there too, but it's so juicy. I'm excited to see where were you going with that sentence? It's so juicy that what?
Oh, I was just so juicy that I was going to say I wasn't going to put it in the chat right now. So in case folks slink over, I'm gonna say ask your question here to bring the juice.
Yeah. Yeah. Bring the juice. I love it. Yeah, the podcast has been really fun, and we do, like, sometimes I'll put out on my Instagram every so often asking people for questions that they want us to cover, which is some of how I got a few of these questions tonight. But what's great is, like, so often people think they're the only one with whatever relationship or intimacy struggle. Like, I mean, all this, this morning I was talking with some clients who are like, really, other couples do this too? And I'm like, yeah, nobody knows it because we do it. So many people feel so much shame about their like relationship mess ups that we don't really air it out there a ton. We don't, we generally, relationships and intimacy are things that we don't really talk about the struggles as much with many people because it's super vulnerable, right? But so then that leaves a lot of people thinking, oh, I'm the only one. So what's been great is when we get these questions, some of them are like one-time Q&As, and a lot of them become whole subjects for like 2, 3, 4-part episodes on our podcast, answering kind of like group themed questions, because so many people share the same struggles. I mean, most of us really do. So, yeah.
I'm going to pull another question from the list that came to you on Instagram, because maybe the person is here. And this question is, she's been stonewalling for an hour and I'm trying to stay grounded, but I'm struggling. So what does one partner do when the other is stonewalling? And I'll just ask this, I'm asking for a friend, it's really me. Can you remind us again what stonewalling means?
Yeah. Well, it's like, it's great that you identified that, because there's actually like a specific theory that comes from. So it kind of like tells me maybe either this person's just describing the behavior that way, which is totally fine, or maybe they know about this researcher named John Gottman and Julie Gottman. They do a ton of research about relationships. So, and they're like, anybody who wants to geek out about relationships or learn some like very clear, simple skills, if you're like, I've already read Gina's book and I want another book about about relationships, you should check out the Gottman's work. They have a couple, many of them have similar themes, but I like one called The Relationship Cure, because it talks about not just dating relationships and like romantic relationships, but also how their research can be expanded to talk about coworkers or parents and children, or, you know, all different kinds of relationships out there. And so anyway, if you need another book about relationships in addition to mine, you should check out the Gottmans, The Relationship Cure. It's really great. So anyway, stonewalling is often like, sometimes it's something someone will do in a conflict intentionally. Most of the time, something someone doesn't even realize that they're doing, but it's kind of like a defense tactic. If you think about a stone wall, if you're somebody like, you know, trying to like break through a stone wall, like it's a lot like that. Like you're going to keep kind of bouncing off, right? Like, and it's going to keep taking, you're like not feeling like you're getting anywhere. You're just kind of running into this wall. So you think about, I've seen people in session, their partner will be like, well, what about this? What about that? And they're like, I don't know. Nothing. I don't have anything to say here. I don't know. I don't have much to add. Or they kind of like, they're just kind of closed off, right? So when I look at this question, she's been stonewalling for an hour and I'm trying to stay grounded. One of the things that you can do with stonewalling is to stop running into that wall, right? Like you may not be able to change the other person's behavior and their reaction of being a stone wall, but you can change that behavior that you have of like, I'm going to keep running into it, right? Sometimes, often, that's a good signal that your conflict just needs a little bit of time for both of you to like check back in with yourselves, get clear. Why am I doing this? What's really important to me right now? Go take a shower, eat a sandwich, take a nap, go for a walk around the block maybe, and come back to it. If you're, instead of like to keep at it, because if you think about like a stone wall, it's going to be pretty hard to force it to move, right? And so I would give myself a break, or be like, I really want to talk about this. It doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere. Let's come back to it, right? Or like, let's talk about it tomorrow morning. Let's talk about it tonight. I'll check back with you in a couple days because I think we need to get some more info, right? Like that kind of thing. But I'm going to let it go for now. And not that we just let it go and like let it fester or ignore it forever, but we let it go with a set, like, when will we come back? How's that for thinking about dealing with stonewalling? I'm seeing like some folks are nodding. So we've got some folks who are familiar with that in relationship. Yeah. I'm like clutching my pearls. We've got some other friends who've been buddies of ours for a lifetime on here too, Stu.
I know. If I don't know how many of you got to see it, it's still on the library's website, but Gina and I did an interview that was pre-recorded, and you can watch where we got to ask her some questions too, and that featured some tales of our long friendship. also hear
Yeah.
what it's like for me to get to have a bestie who became a relationship coach and sex expert. It was a pretty lucky spot for me to be in as a kid growing up and still today. Yeah.
I love it when you say that, because I think about, like, people ask me about my how I ended up doing this, and part of it is I was raised by the two sex educators in our hometown, were our like growing up and liking it teachers, right? And then the other part was I was always geeking out about this stuff with you guys at slumber parties when we were little. Like, I just thought relationships and bodies and stuff were so interesting. Even way back then. So now I just made a career out of it.
And since we're on the topic of your career, can I also just ask, because I got a question that just came to me, where someone is interested in the intersections between subject areas in your background. And I think what this person might be getting at, or what I'm guessing, is like you're also someone who's studied spirituality. You've studied women's and gender studies. You've studied geography. You have this really polyglot kind of, background. And so I guess I'm wondering too, what do you feel that some of those things brings to your understanding of relationships? Your this expert knowledge you've been able to develop.
Good question. Yeah, well, it's been a long and winding path. And I don't know that it's not like this is the end of the path. I've got a lot of working years left in me. So we'll see what I study next. But I've always kind of I was lucky to have a family and a community that was pretty supportive of education growing up. And I got a lot of praise for being a good student. And so I like being a student. So I've been comfy there, and I've been learning a lot along the way. I used to think I would be a high school teacher. I was going to be a geography teacher. And what was true about that is I really liked maps, and I really liked learning about all the different cultures around the world. That was what got me into geography. So it was like learning about people, right? And then the only thing I thought I could do with that was teach. So I was going to teach. And then I fell into some leadership development stuff at my college. I got really into that. And so then I thought, oh, I should do this. And it was like all helping develop people as leaders through coaching on college campuses and like creating programs and stuff like that to build communities. But again, it was like all the about people stuff. And then I went into mental health because there were so many mental health crises on college campuses. And so, it doesn't quite, it's not like I did a whole U-turn, but like I keep picking up things along the way. And so in studying college students, you learn a lot about human development and groups and adult learning. And then in therapy school, we learned a lot about like how, you learn a lot about dysfunctional behaviors and interrupting patterns that come up in people's lives. And that's still stuff that I'm doing. I did not think I would become a couples and relationship therapist at all, which, I thought I was going to work with college students forever and ever. But I fell into an internship with the Gottmans and that researcher that I was talking about, and doing all couples work in my internship because nobody else wanted to do it. It's pretty hard. A lot of therapists don't like it. And so, there tend to be a split. Either you love it or you don't love it. And a lot of folks don't love it. But I loved it. And so, and it finally like made sense to me because of all this like human intimacy stuff that I've always been so geeked out about personally. There was a lot of ways for me to bring that to my work. So it's felt like I kind of like, I was thinking about this as my 3-year-old was adding layers of Play-Doh on his little Play-Doh sculpture. It's more like I had a little Play-Doh sculpture and I just keep adding on another layer along the way. And now I've been so geeked out about relationships and communication for a long time. I don't even read fun books. It was one of the things that felt funny about being at a book fair now, like being an author on a panel about authorship. I don't read enough other than the stuff that's just about my field. Like that's where I geek out and I do a ton of reading. So even now that I'm not in school, I'm like still geeking out about all this relationship-y stuff. I think I've wandered away from your question though.
No, it was wonderful. I mean, I think that explains like all of the different resources that you bring to your work and into working with
Yeah.
people. And actually, it
Yeah.
nicely segues into another question I just got on chat.
Ooh.
And I will just say, because actually some more folks have joined us, so I'll just repeat one more time. We're taking questions tonight, your questions. So you can send your question by typing it in the chat, and then I will say it out loud. Or you could also, if you want to ask your own question, you can raise your hand,
Oh.
which is something you can do electronically by clicking on the word participants at the bottom of your screen, and then finding next to your name a thing that says more, and then clicking on that to find a little hand raise. And if you want, I can unmute you so you can ask your own question. So, but here's a question that just came into me over the chat. How is a couple who, how should a couple decide whether or not they should start with couples counseling or they should start with individual counseling? Like
Oh,
if
that's a good
someone's
one.
sensing a need for some support in their relationship, how do they decide which one to start with?
Yeah. I mean, I tell a lot of people to do both just because the goal is really different. And it's, it's a good thing. It's not like gonna hurt you. Like it's good usually for just about anything. And so if you're feeling stuck in your relationship in some way, the truth of the matter is you're both contributing to that dynamic in some way. It's not always like a 50-50, right? Like it might be a 90-10 split on your contribution level to the conflict, but you're both contributing something. And getting into individual therapy can help you figure out like, oh, that's something I learned growing up in these ways, or that's something that's carried over from my last relationship, or I'm avoiding this, or I'm moving towards that, right? You can learn a lot about yourself, and that will help influence the couple's work if you're both doing that. So I usually suggest people just do both. But the other thing is call around and interview a couple different therapists, because you really want to find somebody who's a good match for what you need. And while you're doing that, they should have recommendations for you, like, oh, it seems like you really need to do a little bit of individual work before you're going to be ready for the couples stuff. Or they might say, oh, let's just dive into this and we'll pick up the individual stuff along the way. But they should be able to give you recommendations too. There are really only a couple things that are pretty it's not as compatible with starting couples work. One is if you've got substance use issues going on, you really want to get specific support for that. Or eating disorder, self-harms, some of the more like personally maybe threatening things like suicidal ideation. That stuff you want to make sure you're getting individual support for, because relationship work is just really about the relationship, not about you solo. It's kind of just about the thing between you. So it's not to say you can't do couples work and be doing that, but those are some things you absolutely want to start talking with somebody soon about. Does that make sense? Like a little bit of both, sometimes one, sometimes the other.
Thank you. I like the idea that you can interview people too. That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I've got another question here. Just changing things up a little, getting, or maybe not really. Why does anyone choose polyamory?
Oh, I like that one. Okay. So my specialization in my work for a really long time was open relationships and consensual non-monogamy. And I've seen people come to that conversation for a lot of different reasons. Some of them have come to it because they found like some sexual incompatibility with their original partner. Like I've had people who are in what looks like a straight relationship, a cisgender man and a cisgender woman, and one or both of them come out later as bi or gay or queer, and they're like, oh, there's parts of my sexuality I want to explore. And this person is like not built or socialized in the ways that I want to experiment with relationship, right? So we're going to find some ways to do that with some other people. I've had some folks come at it from a place of like really mismatched desire. Like one partner might be asexual or might be like just have a very low interest in having sexual connection or affection, and their partner might have higher or a very high drive, and so they might work out a way of like one person is going to see other people, or hiring a sex worker, or has a fling every year at a certain conference or event, right? Or like there's lots of ways folks will shape out some of that. I've seen people come to it because they are really good buddies and they don't have a lot of romance or sexual connection, and neither of them are interested in rekindling that, but they want to find it somewhere. And many of them are like, we have maybe children, we have a household, we have a business we've started together, we want to maintain our lot of partnership around that, but we are realizing there are other things we want in relationship. And then I have a lot of folks who come to it because they're like, I know internally I've always had lots of crushes and inspiration or interest in lots of different people, and I want to be able to invest energy in that and not have it be disruptive to my main or original partnership or any of my partnerships. So those are some of the big ones. There's a lot of reasons people come to the conversation, and it's not a fit for everyone for lots of different reasons. And lots of folks kind of flow in and out of conversations about it. If they stay together a long time, maybe they practice polyamory for a while and then they don't, and then maybe they're swingers for a while and then maybe they're more monogamous by practice. And so anyway, I just offer that and thinking about, why would people do that? It's not always like a fixed conversation. For most folks who are engaging in that conversation, it's one that gets revisited. Yeah. I like talking polyamory because I know for some folks it's like a pretty tricky concept to try and work around or conceptualize.
It was new for me when, I knew you were doing that work at first, and all I could think is, I can barely communicate with one partner. I can't imagine having to communicate with more than one. And,
yeah.
But obviously that's why someone needs support, or why folks need support. And actually now the longer I've known you, the more I've realized, wow, those people who are in a polyamorous relationship, they must have like extra great communication skills, right? Compared to.
Well, one of the things that's come up in COVID is that a lot of folks are needing to practice boundaries around, I think you and I talked about this at one point, are needing to practice boundaries around like talking about personal health and physical interaction in a way that a lot of polycules have been talking about those boundaries really explicitly for a long time. We're actually all moving that direction a little bit to, just talk about like, oh, well, who did you interact with and what kind of closeness are you having with them? And what does that mean for you and I? Right.
Mm-hmm. And did you wear a mask?
Yeah. Yeah. Did you use a barrier method?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's not all that uncommon. And, and the other thing I was realizing is this person asked, why does anyone choose polyamory? You definitely identified one of the best reasons not to choose it, right? Like, relationships require work and maintenance. More relationships means more work and maintenance, right? And so people are like, I'm already tapped out with one person, or I can barely even manage with one person. So that's a good indicator. Maybe you don't have the energy right now. If you're, for whatever reason, you're kind of tapped out, you probably don't want to add more complexity, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So here's another question. And for folks who watched the tape interview between us, they'll know that also you write, you're often asked to write blogs, or you're often asked to write for the Huffington Post. And one of the last times I saw you in January, you were writing an awesome column that someone had asked you to write about how to choose the right anal sex toy. And you were doing this guest blog with, offering how to do it. And so this question that we have is just a little bit more in general. How do you know which sex toy is right for you?
Oh, yeah. Well, that is a great question. And I'll say like one thing, like if I back up one step, one of the things that I see happen a lot with sex toys is that people buy them for other people, Like if like a part, my spouse might buy one for me, or I might buy one for my sweetheart, or somebody buys them for a bridal shower, or like a whatever or something, right? Or like a coming out party or something, which is really great in intention. But I end up seeing a lot of people in my office who say, well, I tried that once and it was not for me, or I didn't like that. And what I want to say is choosing your sex toy is like choosing a pair of shoes, right? I wouldn't send you to the store for me, Stu, and be, as well as we know each other for all these years, and be like, choose some shoes for me, Stu, bring them home. And then I'm going to expect that I could wear them, anytime I want to, right? Like, you don't know how my feet feel, right? You don't know what I'm going to wear them for, how long I want them to work, or what parts of me need more comfort or more support or whatever, right? It is the same with your sex toy. So just think about that. If you're somebody who has like written them off because of one pair you saw once, right? Like if I wrote off all shoes because of one pair I saw once that weren't a good fit, that wouldn't make sense, right? And so just know there is a wide range out there. And the other thing is, like, we are used to thinking like in an entitled way. It's not a perfect metaphor, but in an entitled way about like, my shoes get to fit me. I deserve shoes that are comfy and supportive, right? But we don't think the same way about like our pleasure, right? And so if I'm using this like shoe metaphor, right, you're allowed to like have your pleasure, enjoy your pleasure. Like you get to do the things to yourself that feel good to you, and that is not a threat to other people. That's not gonna like, well, actually I think it could bring peace and harmony to the world if more of us were getting pleasure. But like, it's one of the things we need anyway. Like you get to do your pleasure, right? And you get to like feel comfy in your body, and you get to explore your body. And we don't have enough people telling people that, right? Especially not growing up, but like that means we got a bunch of grown-ups who need to hear it too, right? Like you get to do your pleasure. Please do your pleasure for all of us, and the, for the sake of world peace. So that said, like sex toys are one of the things that helps a lot of people get there, like get to that pleasure point, not even just like get there, but like sense of like, maybe it's hard for you to reach parts of yourself that feel good, or maybe your arms get tired, or your whatever, that you like to feel might like wear out, or not be there, or not be hard to clean, or whatever. Choosing a toy is a way to have access to pleasure that you can clean easily, that, it uses batteries or plugs in maybe. And so it's probably got stamina that parts of you might not have, right? Like, and if your arms or legs don't reach whatever you need them to do, toys aren't just like vibrators and dildos. They can be like a strap that holds your leg up so that you can be in a position with a partner or by yourself that feels good to you, right? Like you can think about toys are just things that can adapt the world to help pleasure come your way, right? So I don't know if that how do you choose the toy that's right for you? The last thing I would say is go to or call one of the, I have a strong bias for feminist owned sex toy shops, but because they're often really sex positive and really into educating people through their decision making. So that might be Good Vibrations, that might be Shebop, that might be what's the one in Seattle? Babeland. There's a sex educator that I just took a class from named Goody. Ask Goody is her site. She specializes in Black-owned sex toys, and I think so. Anyway, there's lots of great ethical folks you can buy stuff from and learn about, like, well, what does this even do, or how do I clean it? Where do I keep it? What if I have to travel? How many batteries? Like all those questions. How big, how small, what's this bump for? Whatever. You can ask those questions of somebody in one of those stores where they're super sex positive, all about guiding you. I want more people to have toys. Whatever toy might mean to you.
Thanks. That was a great question. And just as a reminder, we're taking questions, so you can put them in the chat. I've got a few more that I'm pulling from the Instagram, but I'm definitely open to any questions from this group in the chat, or you can raise your hand
I'm just checking to
electronically.
make sure my parents are still here while I'm peddling sex toys, and but they are.
Sure.
So good job, Mom and Dad. Yeah.
I mean, your folks are on the call. Like, I recognize their name, and
Yeah.
yeah, that brings us to a really great question. What do your parents think of your work?
That's a good question. They could put it in the chat so that we don't all have to hear without editing, but they're like huge supporters. They always share they're sweet. They always share my things on Facebook, like my posts and stuff or my events, and they invite people. And they were here when my book arrived, because they help us with the kids, and so they were here when the book arrived, and it was really sweet to get to share that moment with them. Like, they're really great at celebrating with me. They have said they listen to the podcast, and they have said that sometimes it feels a little, Mom and Dad, you can put it in the chat if you want to, but if it's like uncomfortable to listen to your kid talk through like the details of, I mean, one of our podcast episodes was like anal pleasure. One of them was like how to get yourself off, what to do with a vagina, like what is oral sex, all kinds of things that, you know, a lot of people don't talk about in detail with their parents. And even with as sex positive and affirming of bodies as we are, we don't share like our personal practices. Not that I share a ton of that on the podcast either, but we certainly don't talk about our personal practices in our family, and that's okay. So I don't know, they've said some stuff about the podcast, but it's usually pretty funny. Like one time my dad didn't have his headset earphones hearing aid in, and he thought he heard me saying the orgasm gasp, like instead of talking about the orgasm gap, like statistically there's a gap in who has access to orgasms. So I think that's kind of funny. Anyway, yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And here's another question that came in. How do we emerge from a pandemic sex drought?
Oh, yeah.
So, and I like this question too, because I think it matches with some other ones we saw on the Instagram page too, that kind of were, how do you stay connected after having kids, which is not the same as, you know, but again, like, so let's come to this question about like, what about people who are sort of like, what if my problem is that I feel like I'm not having enough, I don't know, I'm not able to be having enough sex right now, or I'm not able to ask for it, or.
Yeah, well, and I can think about that in two different ways. One is the sex drought. There's one, like statistically, there's plenty of research showing us this right now. There's a huge sex drought in folks who are in committed relationships. People are stressed out. There's major financial concerns for a lot of people. Childcare is a huge issue. Schooling kids is a huge issue for people. There's like, you know, however you feel about the election, there's like a lot of stress and anxiety in the air, and that is not a turn on for most people. And so there's like a huge drought just for folks who are in long-term relationships. Like, we're just not having it. Folks have been calling like, why am I having a hard time getting interested? I really like this person, or I know it's good, but we like neither of us are feeling it right now. And so, you know, one thing is like, part of that's the pandemic, part of that's other stressors like related to the pandemic. So thinking about how it's not like we just get, let's say we get a magic vaccine and we all take it. Still, we're going to need to figure out what we're doing with schools and with kids and with our budgets a little bit. So like, give yourself some grace, I think, is the first thing, as far as like, how do we recover from that? The other thing I would say is really invest in having affection and connection between you, like fully present time, even if you're not doing it. Like, it doesn't have to be everything is foreplay. And for a lot of folks, the longer you're together, the more it feels like either we're doing foreplay or we're not touching, right? There's not like, oh, if you touch me, you're probably trying to initiate something. And so And so I'll do this dance of like, well, do I want to have sex or not? Rather than just, do I like being touched? Like, we don't slow dance, or, like, you can caress my leg and it doesn't mean I'm obligated to sex in 10 minutes or whatever. So notice if you can like play around with more affection and more just being present with each other. That doesn't necessarily have to be related to having sex or not, but just being connected to each other. And I think I said, or it was implied, I didn't say it specifically, but think about what your self-care looks like, because it's really hard to connect with another person if you're not connected to yourself. So in all this stress, a lot of folks aren't feeling connected to themselves. And whatever that practice might be, 30 minutes of walking, taking an extra long shower, actually eating your meals, drinking enough water, right? Like whatever your things are that you need to, like, maybe it's shaving, maybe it's not just wearing sweatpants every day because I'm working from home. Maybe it's like, there's lots of things that might help you feel more in touch with yourself, or a little more confident, or a little more sexy. Do those things for you as part of your self-care. They might make it more interesting or available. It's certainly not going to hurt anybody, right? So that's like people in relationship. We got a long text, Stuke. I don't know if you're in this group chat with some of our friends from a long time ago, but I did just get a long text from someone who was saying, what about single people during COVID, right? Like, it's been like really hard to date. People are sick of, like I just went off about how great masturbation is, but like a lot of people are like, I was not planning doing this just with myself for this long, right? And thinking about like this recovering from the drought, I think there's some like folks have a vision that life after a pandemic will be like, there's a sudden, like, we all decide we're gonna go date, and there'll be like these big parties and I'll get laid all the time. And the truth is there'll probably be still some confusion and like trying to navigate like different boundaries again about like, well, how do we know what is safe, or what's, where my boundaries are. And so I would say for the single folks out there, or for the folks who aren't in like one long-term committed relationship, find ways that are safer to get physical affection if you can. That can be getting a massage. It's not the same as having sex, but we're touch starved right now, so you need to be touched. Like it could be that you have a friend who you can bubble up with, and so you both have agreed upon like, these are our practices about self-care and COVID, and we're gonna only be either friends with benefits, or only gonna sleep together, or we're gonna exchange foot massages and like cuddle and watch a movie, right? Or you're at least somebody I can hug hello, right? Like, remember I used to hug people hello, and it wasn't that long ago. And none of us are getting that kind of touch or shaking hands, or, so finding somebody that you can trust and, having clear boundaries so that you can get some touch is another thing that at least might make it less like, the question we were getting was about like folks, almost like being overcome with this like drive to like, I just have to connect with somebody, and not necessarily making the best choices. And so we kind of like take the edge off a little bit if you're getting some touch in ways that are safe or appropriate now. That making sense? It's fun that I can see some of your faces, Kelsey, like little nods and stuff. It's really sweet.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Here's maybe another question. My husband and I have been having the same exact fight for 4 years. It's not bad enough for divorce, but it still sucks. What's up with that?
Yeah.
I chose this question because I didn't know, we hadn't really talked about breakups or ending relationships yet. And I know that that's probably something else you talk with folks about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, some of that is why I wrote a communication skills workbook, because the thing about those conflicts that are like so cyclical when you get stuck in a rut is, when it's not like, it's not abusive, we don't hate each other, but man, we have this same cycle. Like I could almost draw it out like a choreographed dance of like, you take this step and I take this step, then you do this one, then I do this one, right? We know that pattern so well, and it is really annoying when you're like, I just don't want to do this same thing again. The part of the reason why I did this was this workbook was because I wanted folks to be able to identify like, okay, here, if we can look at like, what are the steps in the dance? There's lots of little ways we could just make like one tiny change, and that might change the whole flow, right? Like the whole routine changes just because we turned left instead of right here. And at least we're not on that same loop. We might get like more curious, or we might reach a different resolution, or we might have hope of like, oh, we can do things different. It doesn't have to be that same cycle all the time. I honestly have people, and this is one of the activities in the book, but I have people draw out like a flow chart or a dance routine of like, okay, well, what are the steps? You know your pattern so well. For 4 years, you've been doing the same thing. What are the steps? He says this, I say this. He does this, I do this, right? Like, let's look at it, because then we can start to like, okay, well, he says this, what if you say something else this time, right? Or if he says this, what if you say, I need pizza before we can talk? Or if like he says this, you say, join me in the living room. And like it's a change of scenery, or it's any little tweak might change the dynamic. And there's other more skillful interventions, but truthfully, even changing location sometimes can just shift things enough to have a different outcome. So so I'm telling this person, draw out your flow chart and start to look at where are the actual like points where I could choose something different right here, or right here, or right here. You're nodding, yes.
I love it when you sometimes answer a question and I have this feeling like, oh, that's something I could do that. That's like, let's have pizza or go in the living room. Like it seems so doable and so manageable. And I just really like that. So thank you.
Yeah. And, at the same time, like, I think one thing that's funny about having a job as a relationship coach, couples therapist, sex therapist is that like people assume that I have like only all the best relationship and communication skills all the time, and have like only all the great sex all the time. And the truth is like, I'm still a human who's doing relationships with other humans. And so I very well know that like, it's one thing to say, okay, let's look at what the steps are and then just do something different. It sounds great right now in theory. But the truth is, and the reason why it's great to either get a book like this one or the Gottman's book, or is that it takes a lot of practice to change those like pattern behaviors that we've been doing our whole life in relationships. And so it can be helpful to have a little tangible reminder, like a drawn out flow chart of like, oh, I need to see that to remind myself. It's a practice. I got to keep reminding myself I'm not going to make that same, not going to follow that same, this is apparently my sign for the choreographed routine, but I'm not going to follow that same choreography again. I'm not going to do that. And then I have to practice that over and over and over again. It's not like I just do it one time, or you and I have this talk and then now we're all cured for all of our relationship woes. It takes a lot of practice.
That leads in well to my next question that just came in. And I think maybe we have time for just one or two more total. So get your questions in if you haven't yet. Because if I'm flooded with questions, then I'll feel like, well, wait, we can't stop now. But yeah. I have one or two. What are your suggestions for reinvigorating a happy 30-year marriage?
Oh, I like that. Okay, reinvigorating a happy 30-year marriage. Well, I wonder about looking at where or how, like in which ways do you want more of something in your relationship, right? Like, so it's not saying there's a problem, because it says, I think they said healthy or happy 30 year or something, right? going pretty good.
Mhm.
But we just want to like kick it up a notch, right? So look at like, what do you want more of? You want more adventure? Do you want more physical intimacy? Do you want more quiet time? Do you want more playfulness? What do you want more of is where I start with a lot of my clients, honestly. A lot of folks come to me not because they're in like a terrible spot, but because they want that kind of like tune up, right? So what do you want? What do you want more of, right? And then we can look at like, okay, well, how do we actually get more of that, right? So if you want more adventure, right now in COVID, some of the travel options are limited, right? But like, are there new things that you could be trying or learning together that will kind of spark a piece of that sense of adventure? And I mention adventure intentionally because what happens in long-term relationships, lots of folks are familiar with desire fatigue, like this idea that the longer we are together, the less sexual intimacy we're going to have. And there's some truth. The first year to year and a half of a relationship, a lot of us will have these like great, yummy hormones and endorphins running around that just tell us like, oh, I can't get enough. This is so exciting. It's so fascinating. And then that does naturally wear off, like anywhere from, for some people, even 6 months in, but a year to a year and a half in, we'll kind of like slow some things down. And that kind of, internal cocktail of connection and fascination wears off just at the same time as we've usually built a fair amount of trust. We've been through our first round of conflicts. We've had to navigate some changes or some bumps or, some letdowns probably by around then. And so we're like increasing trust and stability and security, which is like so yummy, but so not sexy. Sexy is the like mystery, intrigue, curiosity, fascination, like the, I don't know everything about you. Ooh, you surprised me over there, right? That stuff is the sexy stuff. Too much of that, and we don't have stability. Too much stability, and we start to lose that one. So let's bringing it around now to you 30-year people. You probably have a lot of stability and not as much intrigue, fascination, and surprise. And so the Gottmans have a great tool about love mapping where you just like start doing like a newlywed game, lots of questions so you can get curious about each other, even if you think you know the answer. Like what's your favorite toothpaste? I'll tell you, like, that doesn't sound interesting at all, but I had a 40 plus year relationship I was working with once. And when I asked that in a session, they came clean about something. She did all the grocery shopping for at least 30 years of the relationship, and he didn't. And she had been buying like Winto Mint or Winto something flavored toothpaste, and then like she's been using it and she hates it. She hates this Winto whatever flavored, but she thought it was the only flavor that he would use. And he had been buying his own secret stash of peppermint or something for at least like 15-20 years or whatever, his own secret toothpaste stash, because he also hated that Winto whatever flavor. But they didn't know, right? And so like, it's not like that ignited like the most passionate lovemaking of their lives or something. But that like surprised both of them, right? Like gave them a good laugh and like helped them just see one tiny thing about each other in a new way, or one tiny thing where like, oh, I thought I knew everything about you for sure by now. No, there's like still one little thing over here. And either, who knows how they got there, right? But like, I love that example because it's like, we start to think, I know everything about you. You can't surprise me. I just like I'm not that interested. But the beginning of a relationship, part of what's so great is all the fascination that like, oh, you like broccoli? I like broccoli too. That's my favorite vegetable. Oh, what's your favorite broccoli recipe? La la la. We could talk till 3 a.m. about broccoli, right? But 30 years in, you're like, okay, there's that casserole that your mom made once, and we're just gonna do that. That's our whole broccoli story, right? Like, it's no longer fascinating. So I guess I'm saying get fascinated about broccoli again. How's that for a summary?
That's fantastic. I think that's your next book title.
Yeah,
that's what you have for
I
the
love
next
that.
book.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm putting for folks who want more of Gina, if you've, I've just put the link to her Swoon podcast in the chat, so you should click on it. You can find it's along with your colleague, Julie Jeske, your co-host of this podcast, which is fantastic. There's lots of things that you will find on there. Oh, did I put the right link in? It just came up to a.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure.
I think
Great.
so.
Oh, thank you for
my
adding
email
your
in
other.
there too.
Thank you
Yeah.
for adding your other things, because you also you're back in Wisconsin. You work with clients also online. I don't know if you have any openings right now, but I'm just putting that out there. You have all kinds of things that you can offer us.
I have some next month, which isn't that far away. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And folks don't have to live in your same town because you work remotely.
All over.
Yeah. And where's your favorite store to send folks to buy this book? Because I have to admit that I bought it at an online retailer whose name doesn't need to be mentioned.
No, don't mention them. But you know who I really like, because I lived in Portland for the last 7-8 years. The Powell's bookstore is like the I think the largest independent bookstore in the country, maybe. So it's one of the largest, let's at least say that. And so powells.com, they have me there, and it feels pretty fancy actually, because it's like the bookstore I used to go and watch talks from real authors, and now they have my book there. So it's pretty cool, right?
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being a part of the Central Wisconsin Book Festival and for talking with us about your book. We love to celebrate Wisconsin authors and also just great authors in general, and people who are bringing, bringing the news of the world to us. So thank you. And this book is definitely one of those.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. A few folks are saying bye to you in the chat, and that's sweet.
Thanks.
Good. We also have, I'll post one other last thing in the chat. We have a survey that folks can fill out about this event. There still are more book festival events to come this whole week. So check out our, here, I'll post the survey in the chat. There it is. So if you want to copy and paste or open up that survey before you close out. Very funny. Cheryl says, who knew there was polyamory? Oh, sorry, we haven't invited you yet, Cheryl. No, just kidding. Right, there's polyamory here in Marathon County. Yeah, everywhere, right? Thank you all for being here and for tuning in after dark. And yeah, see you at some more book festival events. Thanks.
Thank you.